G'day Year 11. What I'm going to show you today is your assessment task notification. We're going to go through it in some detail so that you can go back and rewatch this as many times as you like in case you've forgotten something important about the assessment task itself. So I'm going to go through the entire thing with you right now. So if you can get your assessment task notification open with you, a pen and a highlighter, and we'll get to it. So this is your second assessment task for Year 11. The idea behind this task is it's going to be another research report, but it's going to take it up the next level compared to your first one. So what this task is going to be focusing on is we're trying to model a mini pip because the idea is in term 4, you guys are going to start your major work when you get into Year 12, the personal interest project. And so what we're going to do with this assessment task is really give you guys as much of a skill building exercise and assessment task that we can that's really going to help prepare you for the PIP in Year 12. So you may hear us refer to this as the mini PIP a lot of the time, and that's why. So it's weighted 40%, so it's the largest percentage weighting for your assessment tasks in Year 11. We are going to assess the topic of personal and social identity, which we've been learning in class at the moment, so looking at the process of socialisation as well. You guys would have received this on the 17th of the 5th, 21. That's term 2, week 5. And the date that it is due is the 18th of the 6th, 21, which is week 9 in term 2. So that effectively gives you 5 weeks. So including, you got week 5, week 6, week 7, week 8, week 9. So that's 5 weeks there. It's 5 weeks notice for you guys to get this done, which is very generous and a lot of time. So hopefully you guys can really take that on board and get it done. The time that it will be due is 11:59 via Google Classroom submission portal. If you're not sure which classroom you're on, all the codes are here for you, and if you have any questions about that, you can always email your teacher here. We'll move down now to the task description. Okay, so this is out of 40 marks, this assessment task. So read along with me. Students are required to conduct a comparative cross-generational study of how the processes of socialisation have changed over time within the student's own cultural context. So I would probably highlight that whole paragraph here. What I would like you to do as well is maybe draw a little arrow above the word comparative. And what that means, you can write this down, is that you're going to examine two different things. Okay, so when we compare something, we've got two different things, and we're going to examine the differences or the similarities between the two. So in this case, we're going to be comparing the similarities or differences between two generations on the process of socialisation and how that's changed over time. So how have they grown up? How have these two different generations grown up, and how has that changed over time? What you are going to do then is present your findings and conclusions in a written research report, similar to last assessment task, but a little bit more high stakes, I guess, being a mini PIP. And you're going to have to use two research methods. So the first one, I would highlight this being the questionnaire, and the second one being secondary research. Now, you guys should be familiar with secondary research. This is something that we did in the first assessment task, but the questionnaire is something new. Now, I know some of you may have done that as an in-class activity. I know that we have with my class. If not, I'm sure that you will go through that as well. Now, examples of different comparative topics that you can use regarding the process of socialisation can be from the following. Okay, so these are all the syllabus dot points that we would have been examining in class. Gender, family and kinship, workplace beliefs, ethnicity and culture, media, especially communications technology, so that's things like social media, the internet, your phones, sexuality, and class and status. So if we go back to this top line here, where you're conducting a comparative cross-generational study of how the process of socialisation has changed over time, you're going to be doing that within one of these topics. So for example, you might look and decide to focus on gender. So you'd be looking at the similarities and differences between the two generations regarding how they've grown up and experienced change through the lens of gender. and you'll narrow that down obviously, but we'll get to that a little bit later. Students are also to create a research question regarding one of the socialization agents listed above. So your big research question will be regarding the socialization process in reference to one of these 8 key areas. Now you also must complete the research proposal attached on your comparative topic before proceeding with the research. So I'm going to open that up now, which is this document here. Now this document is identical or almost identical to the one that you're going to use in Year 12 when you finally end up doing your PIP. But we've just modified this to suit the assessment tasks that we're doing now. But again, it's really good practice for later on. So what you'll want to fill out are answering these questions, and you'll fill out this area under student proposal here. Okay. So you're going to type in what is your general area of interest. So if we go back to the notification, you're going to pick which topic that is, okay? And you maybe want to include why you're interested in that. It's really good to have a personal link or an area of interest, or to study something, that you are interested in, because that'll help sustain you when you're doing your research, okay? You don't want to study something that's going to bore you or something that you're not interested in, because you won't put your best effort into it, and therefore you won't get the best mark that you're capable of. The second part is, what is your specific question or hypothesis? So include what you hope to find out with this. So your hypothesis is your guess or your theory as to what you think is going to happen. So here you're including your big focus question. Let's say, for example, you want to examine how, let's say we look at media or gender even. So your topic might be looking at how gender roles within the family, for example, may have experienced change over time between 2 generations. And so that might be your specific question, and you might then include what you hope to find out. Okay, so you might hope to find out that you hope that it's changed, so it's more equal between males and females. Whether or not that's the case or not, your research may find out. The third part is, which part of the socialization process does your topic relate to? So include relevant syllabus content and concepts. So the idea that we want you to do here is to really link it back to one of these socialization agents, and maybe listing as many concepts as you can to go with that. So if I go with the example of gender roles in the household and how that's changed over time, some concepts just off the top of my head could be persons, gender, identity. Okay, there are 3 main ones there that we can have, depending on where we want to look at in terms of different influences. You might have things like power and authority in there as well, because we're looking at changing roles and status between mums and dads or males and females over time. So there are 5 key main concepts there that you might want to look at in that topic. Which research methods will you use, and include why these research methods are appropriate. So you guys don't really have a choice with this one. When you get to the PIP, you'll have more of a choice, but here you're going to write your questionnaire and secondary research and include why you think that they will be valuable in assisting you with your research. How will you address continuity and or change? So these are some big concepts that we're going to use. They're mainly Year 12 concepts, these two, but it's good to introduce these early on. So the idea here that you're looking at 2 generations over time, so you want to be looking at areas that they have potentially stayed the same or a continuity, and looking at things that may have some differences or things that have changed over time. So it's really important that you have a clear idea on how you're going to address that. What is your cross-cultural component, i.e. which generation are you comparing your own to? So you guys are obviously looking at Generation Z, being the generation that you were born in, and then which generation you're going to compare to that. We're going to get to that in just a second over here, so don't worry too much about that one. And how will your topic help improve your understanding of society and culture? So you can include reference to social and cultural literacy here. So if I get the syllabus open here, you guys should all have a copy of this, and if you go to page 25, you can see a lot of different socially and culturally literate characteristics. Where you can, it would be good to weave this into your research somehow. So let's say if you're looking at how gender roles have changed in the family over time, a potential characteristic that can come from the social and cultural literacy characteristics might be something like, applies skills to achieve social inclusion and is aware of issues of discrimination and prejudice. So you might link that back to the idea that how gender roles have changed in terms of the roles and status of women, and how they're not just seen as a domestic housewife anymore. They have a lot more rights in terms of power and authority within a lot of families, and that helps them achieve social inclusion, or the idea that they have increased rights. So you could link something like that. Even when you're doing your own research, you could look at the idea, let's say you're doing another topic on, where's the assessment notification? On, say, ethnicity or culture or beliefs. A great one that might really fit well there is that you empathise with and appreciate the diverse beliefs and values of different societies and cultures. So linking some socially and culturally literate characteristics in where possible would be fantastic, and it's great to outline that here so you know what to look for. And then finally, what measures are you going to put in place to ensure that you conduct research in an ethical and effective manner? So some things here can be pretty basic, like things like you're going to acknowledge your sources through footnoting, you're not going to plagiarize, you're going to make sure that when you are creating a questionnaire, you're not going to ask any questions that might make someone uncomfortable, you're going to make sure that they remain anonymous, and a few more things like that I'm sure the teacher will go through with you at some stage. So make sure you fill that out, and that will help us and help you keep on track with your assessment task. Okay, so you must have that completed before you proceed with your research, and the idea is that you should have this done by the end of this week, which is the 21st of the 5th, 21. Onto the next page now. When we're looking at generations, there are 5 different ones we want to consider. I want everyone right now to highlight Generation Z, because that is the generation that you guys are from, and that's the generation that you're going to be comparing from. So everyone's going to be looking at Gen Z. Now, whether you want to compare Gen Z to Gen Y or Gen Z to Gen X or the baby boomers and so forth, that's completely up to you. What I would suggest though is try and pick a generation where you're going to have access to a lot of different people that can complete your questionnaire and help you with your research. So a really good idea there might be to find out your parents' generation, so that then they can help share your questionnaire out with their friends and their social media profiles and feeds, and so you're getting a lot more answers. If you're, say for example, you still can do the builders, just be aware that they were started to be born in 1925. It's 2021, so that's 96 years old. There might not be very many builders around. For sure, if you have access to a lot of people in that generation, so your grandparents, and they've got lots of buddies and things like that, feel free to go for it. But just really keep that in mind, that you want to make sure you have access so that you can get plenty of responses for your questionnaire, because the more research and data you get, the better. You may also, I might note that as you're doing your research, you might find different websites may have different years listed with generations. So say for example, they might say Generation Z starts in 94 or 96. Whatever the case may be, what the teachers have decided here is that we're going to stick to this, and we're going to assume that this is the law and this is 100% correct. So when you are referring to generations and different age groups in your research report, we're going to assume that this is absolutely true, and I think that'll just make it easier for everyone, because we'll all be on the same page and have a clear understanding, and it'll help you not get confused when different websites say different things. We're just going to assume that this is correct. Now, what we have here on this page is a guide that's going to help you with your assessment tasks. So the idea here is that you have all these different main dot points here, and you have a date next to them as well. So the idea is this is the action that you need to complete, and this is the date that you should aim to get it done by, to make sure that you're staying on track, so that this can be handed in at the end of week 9 with as little stress as possible. So the first thing you need to do is decide on a topic to be researched, and you should do this by the end of week 5, which is the 21st of the 5th. Okay, so decide on a topic out of one of these 8. Again, make sure it links to something that you're interested in. What you'll then want to do is complete your research proposal once you've chosen that topic, which is that document there here, which we just went through. What you'll then want to do, and this should be due at the same time by the end of week 5, is you want to develop some focus questions. So what you want to do is, say for example, you were to look at, or you wanted to pick gender, and you want to look at how gender has changed over 2 generations. You want to narrow that down a bit. So if I use the following example earlier of how gender roles within the family has changed, you might want to look at that. If you want to narrow that down further, you might want to look at gender roles of just the parents and how that has changed over time. So you really want to try to narrow down your question so that it's not too broad, because if it's too broad, then your research and your questions and your paragraphs won't be specific enough and you'll struggle to write about it. But on the other hand, if it's too niche, you may find it really hard to find some secondary research on that and to write 1,500 words, which is our word count, on that. So that's why it's really important that you complete that research proposal here, because your teacher will be able to help you to make sure that your topic isn't too narrow, but it's also not too broad. So once you do that, you should develop what we call sub-questions in a logical order so that research can develop coherently. A few big words there. So what we mean by developing sub-questions is that, let's say for argument's sake, we're going to look at how gender roles in the family have changed, and we're specifically going to look at the gender roles of the mother and the father. What I might do to develop some sub-questions to help me answer that is similar to what I've done here. See guys how we've got this dot point, and then I've got little sub questions or sub points that help us address that main dot point. You want to do the same thing when you have your research question. So some sub questions to do with gender roles of parents and how they've changed over time might be something like, you might define the term gender and what that means. You then might define the role of the parent and what that is. You might define, and so differentiating between the mother and the father and their rights and responsibilities in Generation Z, for example, and then what it was like, say, in Generation X, for example. Then you might go on to look at how that's changed over time, giving some different examples and opinions, and so on and so forth. So what you've done there is, instead of just having one big question that you're sitting at the computer trying to answer, when you create lots of little sub-questions, it really helps keep your research on track, and it helps you to maintain focus in order to answer your main overarching question. So that's a really good idea to do. What you'll then want to do after that is apply ethical research practices that follow the steps of the research process. So what that means, and this is due by the end of week 6 or the 28th. So essentially what you want to do here is administer a questionnaire. So administer just means to create and give to people. That contains both open and closed-ended questions, and that is suitable from people from different generations. So you want to hit at least a minimum of 10 questions here. I wouldn't suggest going above 15, because when you create a questionnaire, you don't want people to get bored of your questionnaire. If you have too many questions and it takes too long to answer, they might get frustrated and just close out of it before submitting their responses. Okay, so you want to hit the sweet spot of about 10 to 15, and that's a really good space to operate in. Now, the reason that you want to have your sub-questions done before you administer your questionnaire is that you can then use those sub-questions to help guide what types of questions you're going to ask in your questionnaire. So, for example, if we use the gender and parent roles, for example, we had a sub-question that looked at defining the role of parents and the mother and the father. So you might have a question, so let's say question 4. In your opinion, what is the role of the father? Okay, and then they might write their answer. In your opinion, what is the role of a mother in a family? And then they give their answer. So what you'll end up having done there, because you've developed all your sub-questions, you're then going to have research that you can reference back throughout your entire research report. So that's why we do that in that order. Once you've created your questionnaire, you then send it out. You want to give it about a week to get as many responses as possible. Now, in terms of how many responses should you get, there's no real minimum or maximum here. The idea is that the more, the merrier. Like as a general rule, your data is not going to be very good if you only have a handful, say 5 to 10 responses So say, for example, if you've got only 3 people that do your response, if one person says something and then 2 people say something else, you've got a 66% chance over a 33% chance. So whereas if you spread that over, say, 30, 40, 50, even 100 people, if you can get it that far, not saying that you have to, but again, the idea is that the more is the merrier. You're not going to be penalised if you have only 20 respondents or something like that, but just know that the more responses you get, the better your data is, the more diverse it is, and the more you can reference, which is ultimately going to give us more detail to hit those top marks. Once you've administered your questionnaire, it'll spit back on some data for you, and you do that through Google Forms. And what you want to do is then compile, organize, and analyze these results in your research topic. So a really good idea here is to create a blank Google Doc file and then put all your sub-questions and dump it on the document. And then all the bits of information from your questionnaire that answer those corresponding sub-questions, so things like what's the role of the father and the mother, you can cut and paste all those answers under those subheadings so that you've got a lot of information there that you can work with and reference for later. What you'll then do is, this should be done by the 4th of the 6th, is to gather as much background information as you can. So this is where you do a lot of your secondary research. Now you can do this through reference books, journal articles, newspapers, or the internet. Just make sure they're reputable sources of information. So some blog post from Reddit is probably not the most accurate or informed piece of information on the internet, neither would it be a Facebook post. Okay, so make sure that it's a good reputable website, maybe a government website, or a reputable news source like the ABC or the Guardian or something like that. What you'll then want to do is, again, with these sub-questions, you'll notice a lot of it comes back to that, so that's a really important step, is that how you've dumped all your questionnaire answers under those certain sub-questions, you then do the exact same thing with your secondary research, and you dump all of that appropriate information, including the links to the websites to where you got the information from, to make sure you can keep track of it. And then so what you'll end up is you're going to have a massive document. It's probably going to be 4,000 or 5,000 words long, and you're going to have tons of information that you can use to answer all those sub-questions, which effectively answers your big main focus question. And that brings us to the next point. So once you've done that, you should then start to present your findings and conclusions in an appropriate format, which is your research report. And that should be done by the 11th of the 6th. Okay, so that's heading towards the end of week 8. You want to have that done and written. That'll give you a week before it's due to mull it over. Okay, so this is where you include all your findings of your research, your analysis, all your evaluations and conclusions. I'm sure your teacher will give you a scaffold on how to write the paragraphs and things of that nature, so keep an eye out for that. What you also want to make sure you do in your research report is include recommendations or implications on social futures, so looking at the next 5 to 10 years. So this is something that we did in the first assessment task, the reason being that every single topic in Year 12 has a focus area where you have to look at the implications that your topic has on the future of society in the next 5 to 10 years. So say, for example, we go back to that gender roles example within the family. We might look at, based on our current research, what are some problems that we can see arising between the gender roles between parents, and what might that look like in the next 5 to 10 years? How could we fix some of those issues? What are some implications we need to be aware of? So make sure you have a paragraph that has a bit of information on that as well. This is also a really good stage to submit a draft to the teacher, because the formal draft is due on the 11th of the 6th, 21. So make sure you get that submitted and handed in by then. That gives us plenty of time to give you thorough feedback. If you give it to us a day or two before, we're very unlikely to get it back to you in time. And we may only be able to give you verbal feedback based off just giving it a quick glance. Okay, so don't do yourself that disservice. Make sure you get that draft in. It doesn't have to be complete. As much as you've got done, or if you only want us to look at a specific thing, again, that's up to you. Now, that's not to say you can't see us before that date, but the idea is that the formal draft gives everyone a fair and equitable go before the due date. Our last point here is that you want to check the final product, so that's your research report, for editing or typing mistakes, and ensure that all the bibliographical information is correct and included. So you want this done by the 14th of the 6th, which is the Monday, I believe. Just double check that. Yep, that's the Monday of the week that it's due. So the idea is that you're going to have your research report done and dusted by Friday. You're going to send a draft to your teacher so they can maybe look at it over the weekend, or get it back to you some point midweek. And what you should do is just give it another read through, give it a few days, come and look at it with a fresh set of eyes. Make sure that your research flows logically, that your essay is coherent and directly links back to your focus questions. So these are all really important things. If you read over your essay at any point and you get confused about what it is you mean, or you give it to someone else to read, say a parent or a friend, and they say, not really sure what you're going on about here in this paragraph, that's an indication that it's probably not flowing logically and that you need to go back and revise how you've worded some things. Again, here, careful editing of language and construction is important so that your conclusions are made clear. So again, make sure it makes sense, make sure it's always linking back to the question. And a great idea on how to do that is to get a peer from this course to read over it. Hey, mate, can you read over mine? Yeah, sure, no worries, I'll read over yours too. And then you can do each other a solid. Last but not least, make sure that you apply all the fundamental and additional course concepts throughout your entire research report. So where you can use concepts instead of other words, make sure you're including that in, and make sure that you're referencing and just weaving them throughout your entire report, because in the marking criteria, which we'll get to a bit later, it's something that we mark you on. And indeed, they do that in Year 12 when it comes to the PIP and the HSC. So it's a very important skill. The requirements for this task. We have a 1,500 word count. You can go 10% above or below this, which ends up being exactly 1,350 words to 1,650 words if you want to get technical, but aim for as close as 1,500 as you can and you'll be sweet. Make sure that you write your report in size 12 Arial or Times New Roman font with 1.5 line spacing. Please note that footnoting and your bibliography, I might add that here, and you can add the same in yours. Your footnoting and bibliography is not included in the word count. So I'm just going to quickly show you guys how to do line spacing. I know that confuses some people. So if I go to a Google Doc that I've got open here, say I've got size 12 Arial font. Now this little button here, where you highlight over that, it says line spacing. You want that to be 1.5. So if I'm to write a big sentence, let's just say I'm going to write a bunch of words. Excuse the gibberish. Let's say I paste that a few times. Okay. When I put line spacing in, it's going to make that space out. So the gap between the lines here increases, and that just makes it look more professional. So that's what you want to do, is make sure that that 1.5 is ticked and that you've got Arial, size 12, or Times New Roman. Now in Word, if I go back to here, it's the same button here and it looks the same. It's in line spacing here, and you can just click that and tick 1.5 as you will. You want to make sure that you've also got evidence of referenced secondary sources using footnotes. Make sure they are referenced, because we will do a plagiarism checker, and if any sources come highlighted and they haven't been referenced, then that might be an issue that your teacher will discuss with you. You also want to ensure that your referencing system is the same and used consistently throughout your report. So what that means is that you're not going to do footnoting for one sentence and then the next sentence you're going to do an in-text citation. Make sure that you stick with the footnotes and you use the same system. Okay. Another thing that you'll have to do is what's called an annotated bibliography. I'm going to do a separate video on how to do that, and I'm sure your teacher will go over that with you in class. But you need to do an annotated bibliography of all secondary sources used, and that is required to be submitted at the end of your research report. So again, ensuring your bibliography follows the same footnoting conventions used in your research report. So at a glance, an annotated bibliography is similar to a bibliography where at the end of your research report, you'll have a big list of all your different websites and books and whatnot that you've referenced throughout your report. But when you do an annotation, you list the source, and then below it you talk about, you do a few sentences on how it was useful to your topic, what you ended up using it for, and whether it was reliable, bias, or a valid source of information, and why. Again, I'll do a separate video on that, so check that out, or even ask your teacher for some help there. What you'll also need to submit is a blank copy of your questionnaire. Now you can either attach that online to the Google Classroom portal or print it off. So just double check with your teacher which they'd prefer there. And then last but not least, your actual research report itself will be submitted via Google Classroom by the due date. Some frequently asked questions that we get. Can I go over the word count? No. You can go 10% above or below. That's it. If it's 1,651 words, that one word will not be considered for marking. If it's 1349, then you are below the word count, and that's not good either. So make sure that you are within that range, okay? Simple as that, okay? It doesn't need any more ifs or buts or any questions like that. Stick to that range. That's what we've been asked. What if my computer blows up and my work is lost? Tough is the short answer. There's going to be absolutely no special consideration for technology failure on the due date. It's really highly recommended that you back up your work frequently. Again, a great way to do that is to do it on Google Docs, where it saves and uploads automatically. You can also do that through OneDrive if you prefer using Word. And you can also save your work, download it, email it to yourself, so you can always have a copy. Okay, so there's going to be no excuse for technological failure. Okay. Are we going to work on this in class? The answer is yes. The timing will be up to your teacher. However, everyone's going to get 4 lessons worth of class time. Whether your teacher wants to do that once a week or whether they want to do it all in 1 week is up to them. But all the classes will have 4 lessons worth of class time to work on it. That's not including this lesson. Do I work on this assignment at home? Yes, it is expected that students will continue to work on their research at home as well as school. The reason being, it's going to be really unlikely that you guys are going to be able to get all of this done in the 4 hours and 4 lessons that you have at school, so it's expected that you're going to work on it at home. That's definitely the case for the PIP as well in Year 12. Okay, you got to put in the hours at home. That's where most of the magic happens. And the idea behind that especially is that when you get to class and we get to those 4 lessons, if you come up to me or your teacher and you've only got 10 words written down on a page, there's not much feedback I can give you other than you need to get started and maybe help you getting started. Whereas if you've written 1,000 words or 500 words, you've given me a lot more to work with there. I can really help guide you on what you've done well, what needs improvement. So it's really in everyone's best interest to have as much done as possible at each segment that you can. So working on it at home, therefore, is a must. If you do have internet issues or access at home, just let your teacher know and we can sort it out and get you hooked up with something to help you. Okay. Should I use personal language in my report, such as I, me, we, you, your, our? So generally speaking, no, you don't want to. Now, because, however, the nature of this task is a personal research report, you can use words like I and my, and you can say my research reveals this. But the idea is that we want it to sound academic and we want it to sound formal. So you're not going to say I'm writing a sentence about gender roles and I'm in the family and I'm looking at mum and dad. I'm not going to say, as the parent, you feel isolated or left out when one of you goes to work and the other one has to stay at home. Okay, that sounds really poor and it flows really badly. You might say, over time, females have experienced an increased desire to leave the domestic duties of the household and pursue work outside of the house. This was evident in my questionnaire when such and such stated this. Okay, so you can use the my and I, but you want to make sure it sounds academic. Okay, what people fall down with is when they use the I, me's, you's, and yours, and it makes your essay sound elementary and not as academic and in that sort of top A range where we're looking at. Okay, Again, if you submit a draft and check in with your teacher regularly, they'll be able to help guide you on how to do that. How many secondary sources should I reference? There's no limit here. A good research paper will utilize as many as you can. Aim for at least 10, but again, similar to how we said, or how we talked about the amount of respondents you can get, there's going to be sort of no official mark penalty if you have less than 10. But the idea is when we get to this criteria, when you see verbs like makes informed judgments, if you have an informed judgment, it's backed by a lot of different research. If you have a thorough synthesis of ideas, you're referring and relating to a lot of different research. So if we're really pushing for those band 6 A range marks, you got to take the onus on yourself to go above the minimum. Okay, so scraping the barrel and aiming for exactly 10 or less than 10 is fine, but you just got to understand that that's not what the top A range or band 6 range. You guys got to keep in mind that in year 12 you're not just competing with the people in your class, but you're competing across the whole state, every student in the state, and you better believe that a lot of them are putting in a lot of the extra work and hours to go above and beyond to get the band A, the band 6, and that A range. Okay, you don't get a band 6 without going above and beyond. So that's, I guess, what I'm trying to say about that is that yes, we want to aim for at least 10, but you definitely want to get more if you're pushing for these top bands. Can you include graphs and images? Yes, you can, and in fact I think it makes your research report look better, but you just want to make sure that you're not chucking in images there just to merely illustrate it. You want to make sure that you're referencing why it was useful, why it's there. So say within your paragraph you refer to all these statistics, and you might have an image of that, the statistics, or a graph that represents the information that you were talking about, and that's a good way to make sure it's relevant and it's linking. Say you're not just going to have a random picture there with no explanation and it's just sitting out there in the open. Okay, that's not what we want. So you want to make sure they're integrated and that you're referencing them and that they're related to the topic. Can I submit a draft for feedback? Of course you can. Like we said before, you can have one formal draft where you submit it, say, online, and we do lots of comments on the side for you. The due date for that is 1 week prior to the due date, which is the 11th, which I think we wrote up here. 11th of the 6th. No drafts will be accepted after this time. You can obviously come up for some verbal feedback, but just keep in mind that seeing us a day or two before it's due doesn't show a lot of responsibility on your part, and you just got to have to cop the fact that we may not have enough time to help you. We'll do the best we can, but it's really up to you, and the onus is on you to get that in as early as you can. Okay, we've given you 5 weeks to get this done, so plenty of time there. Okay, get started straight away. Last point here, I'm struggling and need help. What can I do? You should let your teacher know as soon as possible so that we can try and help and support you as best we can. Also, really take advantage of all the support that's available at schools. So you've got student services, which is always open and happy to help you. They're usually in nursing, but they're located in Tech Futures at the moment. You've also got Wednesday Homework Centre, which runs every week from 3 to 4, every Wednesday afternoon. And what you seniors have now especially is something called Tutorial Tuesdays. So on the period 5 and 6 of Tuesdays, where most of you go home, there's a lot of tutors and teachers that are going to be hanging around the library, including myself, Tuesdays period 5 and 6, to help you guys catch up on any assignment or schoolwork. So you've almost got 4 different avenues there. You've got your teacher that you can go to, you've got student services, you've got Wednesday Homework Centre, and you've got the Tutorial Tuesday sessions there as well. Okay, so lots of different areas to support. Make sure you utilise it. That's why it's there, to get the help and support you need to make sure that this essay, our research report, is as best as it can be for you. Okay. Last but not least, make sure you make a genuine attempt. Make sure you seek teacher feedback prior to the due date for guidance, and if you know that you're going to be away on the day of the task or beforehand, really make sure that you see your teacher beforehand so that we can put in parameters to make sure that you're not going to get penalised for any late submissions or anything like that. Alrighty. Last but not least, we're going to go through the marking criteria quickly. Now, I'm only going to go through the A criteria because that's what we're all going to be aiming for. So again, get your pen and highlighter out. We're going to talk and break down some of the key verbs here, because that's really what differentiates the A from the B from the C is the verbs. Okay, so what I mean by that is the action words, the doing words. So the first criteria you're going to get marked on is demonstrating a thorough and sustained synthesis of relevant ideas, issues, and information relating to one agent of socialization process. So the key verbs here are thorough, I would highlight that, and sustained synthesis of relevant ideas. So I would highlight those three or four things that we've just done there. So above thorough, if you like, that's having things in detail. So I'd write in detail above thorough. So again, that's where having 1,500 words comes into play. You want to make sure that you've got plenty of examples to reference to really show us that you have a really deep and thorough understanding of your topic. What we mean by sustained synthesis, or the word sustained here, is that you're really maintaining logical flow. So that's making sure that your ideas flow from one point to the next seamlessly. You're not going to start, say, talking about gender roles of mum in Gen X and then jump and talk about the role of fathers in Gen Y, and then come back to the mothers in Gen Y, and then shoot back to Gen Z again. Okay, you're going to make sure that those ideas flow and that they're sustained. When we're talking about synthesis, what that means is that you're going to be using, and I'm sure your teacher will go through this in more detail with you, but in a nutshell, whenever you make a point in your essay, your research report, you want to synthesize your ideas. So what that means is, let's say you start your paragraph with a point. Let's say my point, using the same topic example we've been using most of this video, is that gender roles have changed over time between Generation Z and Y, especially for mothers. So that's my point. What I'm going to do is I'm going to back that point up with primary research. So I'm going to back it up with questionnaire quote or some statistics from my questionnaire. What I'm then going to do is I'm going to refer to a secondary research website, article, whatever it may be, that's either going to support or show a different idea that was different to my primary research. So the idea there is that you are synthesizing and you're integrating both primary research and secondary research throughout your entire paragraphs. Comprehensively addresses, so this is the second point here, comprehensively addresses cross-generational perspectives of how the processes of socialization have changed over time. So the key verb here is comprehensively. So if something's comprehensive, it's done fully, or you've given it 100%. So what we would expect there is, again, if you're comprehensively looking at something, you're looking at all the different angles. So you're not just going to examine Gen Z and their perspective. You're going to make sure that you compare that with a different generation, and you're going to make sure that you give that as much attention as you do each other generation. So you're not going to have, say, 500 words on Gen Z, and then you're going to have 1,000 words on Gen Y, because that's not comprehensive. You got to imbalance there. So you want to make sure that you're fully exploring every perspective and idea that you do, and giving it as equal attention as you can. Next up point is presenting a clear, coherent, and well-structured research report that demonstrates highly effective communication, incorporating accurate and appropriate language, and, where applicable, graphic forms. So the main verbs here are clear, coherent, and well-structured. So if something's clear, that means the marker is able to read it the first time and understand what you're talking about, and it's really, really clear to them. Okay, if someone reads it and it's not clear what you're saying, that's an indication that you need to go back and maybe reword something. So the idea, or the main purpose behind having something clear, is it makes your examples come across more effectively, it makes your judgment stronger, and it improves the overall flow and quality of your essay. And it's the same with coherent and well structured as well. Fourth one here, makes informed judgments on the useful validity and bias of information that contributed to the research project. So the idea here is informed judgments. So the word informed means it's backed by research. So when you're talking about your research project, you want to make sure that you're talking about the usefulness, validity and bias of information. So a lot of that's going to come in your annotated bibliography, but it's also good to talk about in your research report as well. So when you're making these informed judgments, you want to make sure that they're backed by research, and you're not just going to make a judgment willy-nilly out of the blue and not back it up, okay? And then the last two here, the main verbs are effectively. And so here, in these last two outcomes, what we're going to be looking at is how well you apply and integrate concepts throughout your writing, which we are all very familiar with, and how well you've applied your research methods. So that's us looking at, say, within your essay, have you referenced primary research and secondary research in every single paragraph? Maybe you've only done it in one or two, then you haven't done it effectively. If you're doing it effectively, you're doing it all the time, and you're synthesizing it all the time. So that brings us to the end of the assessment task notification video. I hope you found that helpful. If you do have any questions or comments, please make sure that you see your teacher as soon as possible. And other than that, good luck and all the best. I hope you get the mark that you're after. Bye-bye.